Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Last night was epic. My roommate and I had thrown a party to celebrate finishing our final semester of college. We both graduated with honors, me with a major in business and a minor in art, him with engineering. The apartment was packed with our closest friends, and we might have gotten a bit carried away with the celebrations. I might have. I mean, we definitely did. This morning we woke up to what looked like a war zone. Besides the typical party aftermath of empty bottles and pizza boxes, we discovered several holes in our walls. Most were from people getting too excited while dancing and bumping into things. There was even one that perfectly matched the shape of my friend's elbow. He's a terrible dancer. So there we were, hungover and miserable, driving to the Orange hardware store at 9 a.m. because our landlord was coming for inspection next week. My roommate went to find wall repair supplies while I headed to the paint department, trying to remember what shade of beige our walls were supposed to be. The fluorescent lights were not helping my hangover at all. I stood there squinting at the paint swatches, probably looking like a zombie. Finally found what seemed like the right color, and since there wasn't anyone at the paint mixing station, I tucked the swatch in my hoodie pocket. While waiting, my mild obsessive tendencies kicked in, and I started organizing the messy swatch display. That's when I heard it. The woman demanded that I do my job and mix her paint, her voice sharp and impatient. I just stared at her blankly, my hungover brain struggling to process what was happening. She got even more aggressive, practically yelling at me to mix her paint. When my brain finally caught up with reality, I tried to tell her I didn't work there, but she cut me off. She accused me of lying, saying she had seen me sorting the color wall poorly and that only a lazy employee would do something like that. In my hungover state, I told her honestly that her screeching was making me want to puke. This set her off completely. She started screaming about how terrible of a worker and person I was, threatening to get my manager and have me fired before storming off like a hurricane in a floral dress. That's when I heard familiar laughter behind me. My roommate had witnessed most of it and was practically crying from holding in his laughter. We decided to wait for the manager, hoping to get our paint mixed before getting kicked out. A store employee showed up, completely unaware of what had happened, and started mixing our paint. Then the woman returned with a manager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She immediately started screaming, accusing me of calling her horrible names I never used. The manager, looking at the employee, expressed surprise at such behavior. The confused employee asked what was going on, and the woman clarified she meant me, the scrawny one in the hoodie, even accusing me of being drunk. The manager, clearly confused, tried to explain that I didn't work there, but offered to ask me to leave for insulting her. The woman insisted I worked there because she had seen me working. I sarcastically announced that I quit, which only made her more furious as she demanded I be fired instead. Our paint was ready by then, so I asked the employee if he'd escort us to the front. The woman kept screaming while the manager tried placating her with coupons. We could hear her all the way to the checkout. The employee walked us to our car and we explained what really happened. He found it hilarious and said he'd tell his manager the truth. We stuck around in the parking lot out of curiosity and the employee promised to update us once she left. What happened next was better than we could have imagined. The police had to be called to remove her from the store. The manager and employee came to apologize to us, and we got some free store perks out of it. She came back later that day in a rage, took a baseball bat to the garden equipment display outside the store, and got arrested for vandalism. The police found she was already on probation for a previous retail rampage, so she ended up serving 6 months in jail. My roommate and I still laugh about it whenever we pass by that store. The paint job turned out perfect. We got our security deposit back, and the woman got exactly what she deserved. Not a bad outcome for a hungover hardware store run. I'm a single father who lost my wife to a sudden illness a few years ago. Since the pandemic hit, I've been living with my elderly grandmother, she's in her 90s, and my cousin who has special needs, along with his mother. They're wonderful people who help around the house and contribute to bills when they can. Both my grandmother and cousin have compromised immune systems, so I take extra precautions whenever I need to go out. Usually I order everything we need online, but today the store's website was having technical issues. We needed groceries, especially some special dietary items for one of my family members, so I had no choice but to go shopping in person. I always follow a strict routine when I return home. Immediately shower and change into fresh clothes, making sure to keep my worn clothes separate until they're washed. It might seem excessive to some, but with vulnerable family members, I can't take any chances. So there I was at the store wearing my casual outfit, jeans and a black insane clown posse t-shirt. I've been shopping for about 20 minutes when I heard someone snapping their fingers. I ignored it since I obviously didn't work there. Suddenly, someone screamed right in my ear, demanding to know if I was going to help them or not. I jumped and shouted in surprise, asking what the hell was going on. When I turned around, I found a woman with short hair wearing clothes that were clearly too small for her frame. She had the sourest expression I'd ever seen. She started screaming at me, threatening to get me fired if I didn't help her immediately. I shouted back, emphasizing each word, that I didn't work there, and told her to get lost and find an actual employee. She looked shocked, like no one had ever dared to talk back to her before. Then she tried to slap me, but I blocked it. She attempted another slap, which I also blocked. I warned her that this was her second attempt, and if she tried once more, I would slap her back. She screamed that she was going to get me fired and stormed off. I yelled after her, telling her not to let the doorknob hit her behind on the way out. I saw her shoulders jerk as if she'd been struck, but she kept walking. I continued shopping, though I was pretty angry by this point. Just wanted to finish up and get home to my family. A store employee approached and asked about the commotion. I explained everything, and I could see her trying to hide a smirk when I mentioned my parting words to the Karen. We were having a nice chat that was helping calm me down when we heard that irritating voice again. The woman had returned with a manager, screaming and pointing at me. She demanded that I be fired, claiming I had threatened her when she asked for help. The manager tried to explain, looking confused, that he couldn't fire me because I wasn't an employee. The woman insisted that I did work there and threatened to file a complaint with corporate if he didn't fire me immediately. The manager repeated that I wasn't an employee, telling her she was welcome to contact corporate, but it wouldn't change that fact. Her face turned purple with rage, and she charged at me like a bull. This time she managed to land a slap. Now I'm generally against hitting women, but pure instinct took over and I slapped her back. She spun around and fell to the floor. Store security arrived and initially restrained me, thinking I was the aggressor. The woman got up and started screaming about assault and demanding police intervention. She tried multiple times to attack me again and had to be restrained herself. The employee who'd been chatting with me explained everything to the manager. Apparently, she'd witnessed the woman's second slap attempt and my warning earlier. When the police arrived, the woman launched into a profanity-filled tirade, demanding my arrest and bragging about the lawsuit she planned to file. The police interviewed us separately and checked the security footage. She looked smug when she saw handcuffs coming out, but her expression changed real quick when they told her to turn around. They had to drag her out of the store while she kicked and screamed about having their jobs and how she was the real victim. The officers asked if I wanted to press charges, since the footage clearly showed I acted in self-defense without excessive force. I didn't hesitate to say yes. Later I found out she had a history of harassing other shoppers, but had never physically assaulted anyone before. Turned out she already had a court date for a different incident at another store, so this new assault charge wasn't going to help her case at all. The store also banned her permanently, and I heard that she ended up serving community service hours while wearing a bright orange vest, right outside the same store she'd been banned from. I work as a project manager for a tech company, and my position requires me to be in the office early to coordinate with our overseas teams. This means I'm usually one of the first people to arrive at our office complex, which houses multiple companies across 6 different parking lots. Over the years, I've developed a perfect routine. I discovered this hidden parking lot that most people don't know about because you have to drive through an indoor parking area to reach it. It's marked for compact cars only, which keeps the massive SUVs away, and it's right next to my office entrance. Perfect, right? Well, it was until today. This morning it was pouring rain, the kind where you can barely see through your windshield. When I arrived at my usual lot, it was unusually full, but luck seemed to be on my side when someone pulled out of a spot close to the entrance. I waited for the guy to leave, exchanged a polite nod, and pulled into the space. When I was getting my laptop bag from the back seat, I heard honking in the distance but didn't think much of it. That's when Karen and her show began. This woman in an enormous SUV came screeching across the wet pavement, cutting me off from the building entrance and splashing dirty water all over my pants in the process. She immediately started yelling at me, claiming that the parking spot wasn't meant for me. When I asked her what she meant, she angrily explained that she had been waiting for that spot and accused me of stealing it from her. I sarcastically asked if she had been waiting on the highway, which only made her more upset. She continued ranting, telling me she had been looking for a parking spot for 20 minutes and insisted that the first person waiting should get the first available spot. I looked around at the row of empty spaces she had driven past just to come yell at me. The entitlement was breathtaking. I pointed out the numerous available spots nearby, but she refused to consider them. She demanded that I move my car immediately. When I asked why she specifically needed this spot, she explained it was so her baby wouldn't have to walk far in the rain. I looked at her baby in the back seat, a preteen kid who looked thoroughly embarrassed by his mother's behavior. He just gave me a casual greeting, clearly used to his mother's antics. I tried explaining to her that her kid wasn't actually a baby and would be fine walking a short distance. I also pointed out that her SUV wouldn't even fit in the compact spot and suggested another lot around the building with regular-sized spaces. Instead of listening to reason, she resorted to personal insults, commenting about my weight and suggesting I needed the exercise. I hadn't had my morning coffee yet, and this woman's attitude was the last straw. I told her I wouldn't move for such a colossal witch, and added that I hoped she'd get struck by lightning as she walked in the rain. She continued hurling insults at me as I walked away. Once I got to my desk, I actually started feeling guilty about wishing lightning would strike her. That guilt lasted exactly 5 minutes until I heard a car alarm outside my window. I looked out to see Karen keying my car's driver's side door while her kid recorded it on his phone. I quickly snapped pictures of them in the act and called building security. When the security guard approached her, she completely lost it, spitting on him and scratching his face. The police arrived within minutes. Turns out the security cameras had captured everything from the moment she entered the parking lot to her assault on the security guard. They arrested her for destruction of property and assault, and her kid ended up getting picked up by his father. But here's where it gets even better. During the police investigation, they discovered this wasn't her first rodeo. The district attorney is now pursuing additional charges for her pattern of behavior. My insurance covered the car damage, and I ended up installing a dash cam just in case. That hidden parking lot now has a security guard stationed there during peak hours, making it even more perfect than before. I've been working as a wine distributor for over 15 years, specializing in local European wines. My wife and I make it a point to bring unique bottles to our friends and family whenever we travel. It's become our signature thing. Everyone looks forward to trying the special drinks we bring from our trips. This particular incident happened about 6 months ago when my wife and I were heading to visit my sister, who recently moved to Finland with her husband. We were traveling light with just hand luggage since it was a short trip. The plan was to bring 4 bottles of this amazing local spirit that my brother-in-law had been dying to try. Now I know the ins and outs of transporting alcohol through airports. It's literally part of my job. I've done this hundreds of times, and I always prefer keeping bottles separated to prevent breakage. There's nothing worse than having one broken bottle ruin everything else in your bag. So there we were at the duty-free shop in the airport. I carefully selected 4 bottles, each one different and special. When we got to the checkout, the cashier checked our boarding passes and told us that since we were connecting through another country, she would need to put the bottles in sealed security bags. I politely asked if she could put each bottle in its own separate bag. She flatly refused, stating that she had to put 2 bottles in each bag. When I asked her why, she simply replied that this was just the way it was. My wife squeezed my arm, knowing how much I hate non-answers like that. I've dealt with actual aviation security regulations for years. They're always specific and for good reason. I pressed her further, asking for an explanation or if it was an airport policy. She just sighed and repeated that this was how they did it, insisting on 2 bottles per bag. At this point, I noticed several people queuing behind us, but this was about principle now. If there was a legitimate reason, I'd understand, but that's just how we do it isn't a reason. I told her that in that case, I would like to make 4 separate purchases, 1 bottle at a time. Her eyes widened, and I saw her jaw clench. She tried to protest, pointing out that there were other customers waiting. I explained that since she couldn't put each bottle in its own bag in a single transaction, we would need to do 4 transactions. My wife was trying not to laugh as the cashier realized she'd backed herself into a corner. She could either explain the actual reason, if there was one, or do 4 separate transactions. For the first transaction, she scanned our boarding pass, put the bottle in a bag, and sealed it with what seemed like extra aggression, trapping as much air as possible inside. The second transaction involved more angry scanning and aggressive sealing. By the third transaction, I could practically hear her teeth grinding. During the fourth transaction, she was practically radiating frustration. The whole process took about 4 times longer than necessary, and by the end, the line behind us was substantial. But I got what I needed, 4 separately bagged bottles that I could safely distribute between our carry-ons. When we were walking away, we overheard her supervisor approaching. The supervisor asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she had noticed the 4 separate transactions. When the cashier explained that I had insisted on separate bags for each bottle, the supervisor asked why she hadn't just put them in separate bags, pointing out that there was no rule against that. My wife and I quickly walked away before we burst out laughing, but we could hear the supervisor starting to explain proper customer service practices. The bottles made it safely to Finland, and my brother-in-law was thrilled with his gifts, worth every minute of those 4 transactions. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.